All right. Well, I'm just going to start this off simply because I know this is something that I've wanted to do for a long time. And it's basically to practice my extroverted thinking. And honestly, at the beginning, I didn't really know what that meant. It was a really tricky concept to even try and grasp what that meant. What does it mean to think extrovertedly and to openly talk about what my brain is thinking about in the moment? Because in a way, that's exactly what you see whenever a presenter comes up on stage. What they're doing is they're trying to convey what they're trying to think of and do it in a way that everybody can see visually, everybody can see with auditory, with sound, and any other way that they can possibly convey in an extroverted fashion. And I never knew what that meant until recently. I started listening to lectures, I started listening to different people's opinions and ideas about this topic, and I've listened to a lot of other different topics as well, mainly about psychology. That's the one thing that has attracted my attention the most. So I figured, I may as well just try it. Let's just see what I can do. And I've already practiced a little bit, as you can probably tell by the way that I'm conveying myself currently. I've already practiced it a little bit off screen. I practice any time that I have a thought that I'm trying to go through. I always try and talk it out and see what I can figure out. And that's something that was really interesting to me because I'm like, well, if I'm able to do this right now just by talking and walking around, then what else could I put this skill to? How can I manifest it into becoming the greatest potential that it could be? Well, this is the first one, so let's find out. So I'm going to begin this very simply. I'm just going to talk a little bit about myself. And by a little bit, I mean I'm probably going to go on a lot of tangents. I'm going to talk about things that I do know, things that I don't know, because there's a lot that I don't know. But I'm going to try and talk about what I do know and my experiences that I have been through, just for this first episode, just to keep it like really simple for me. And see, that's one thing also about it. See, I'm already going off on a tangent. Anytime that I use the word like, anytime I have ums, I want to remove those. I want to make those as minimal as possible. And it's really, really crucial that I lock those down and I figure out what those are and why I do them and how I can stop them from happening. Because honestly, that just ruins the entire aesthetic of trying to openly express yourself. That's extroverted thinking. You gotta get rid of all those words that are negligible. And that's another thing too, is trying to articulate what I'm trying to say in the most effective way possible. Right? It's usually not easy to be as effective as possible while you're trying to communicate. But that's what I'm going to try to do, and I'm going to try and keep eye contact to a certain amount. But you're going to see often, anytime I'm looking up or I'm looking to the side, it's because I'm trying to think. I'm trying to figure out what I want to say next, and I'm trying to stay calm during this. Obviously, I've got no audience. I've got nothing to look at. I've got just a screen to look at. But I'm still going to try and pretend as if I am looking at an audience and as if I should be focusing on at least one person at a time. Because that's one thing that I learned is whenever you're doing any sort of lecture, any sort of presentation, you should at least focus on one person at a time, and that actually makes it easier to do the lecture. Because whenever you're focusing on one single person at a time, you're not focusing on the entire audience that's around you. You're focusing on just one single point. And that's one thing that I learned in the psychology lectures that I listened to, is that humans are very pinpoint accuracy creatures. We like to focus on one single part, and whenever we do, we tend to do amazingly at that single part. Like, think for instance, whenever you're focusing just on your job, you don't notice how fast time goes by whenever you're working on your job. As long as you're actually focused and you're actually interested and you want to be there. If you don't want to be there, man, it's going to be hell. So anyways, let's just get off that tangent. Let's go straight for what I wanted to talk about, which is just me. I'm going to talk about me. I'm going to talk about where I came from. I'm going to talk about where I grew up from. This is going to be somewhat personal to a certain degree. I don't know how far I'm going to go with this, but we're going to try it out. We're going to see what happens. So I was raised in Canada. I still live in Canada. I'm from Ontario, Canada. I came from a little town named Cornwall, and that is still where I'm currently residing. And honestly, the people here are not the greatest. I can already tell because of, yet again, I've listened to a lot of psychology lectures, and I know when I see a low quality person. I know what that looks like. And a lot of the people here, I can see it. And there was also like a statistic or something. Cornwall is like the fifth or fourth worst town in the entirety of Canada or something like that. It's not a great statistic, but it's where I am currently. And this is another thing too. Is see, I try to think, and that's my problem currently. Is I often run out of things to talk about that don't interest me, and that's why I was hesitating to talk about my life because my life doesn't interest me, which is really weird because you'd think your life would interest you, but I guess it's because I haven't done enough interesting things yet. Um, but okay, well, I am currently 18 years old. I went to the St. Joseph High School. I absolutely enjoyed it there, and it was where I met some of the highest quality people I will ever meet in quite a while. I'm going to go to university at some point, and definitely I'm sure I'm going to meet many other people that are going to be much more qualified and, you know, just far more advanced in their thinking than anybody that I've met currently in my life. But St. Joseph High School, I met top of the line people. And when I say top of the line people, I don't mean the students. And, I suppose you could see, like, there are definitely some students that I could say were there, but I could tell the maturity wasn't there, and maybe that's an arrogance thing. Maybe that's something that I haven't really recognized about myself. Is perhaps I was being a little arrogant on my judgment, and now I can't really think back because it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly the things that they did or didn't do that made me think that they were or were not mature. Um, but anyways, so after high school, I decided to leave. I went for a 13th year, or I tried to go for a 13th year, but then I decided to instead focus on one of my biggest passions at the time, which now has fallen down a little bit in priority, but it is still definitely something that I think I want to do in life, given that I stay interested in it, which is programming. So I am big in programming. I actually released two apps in the App Store whenever I was 17 years old. They were big projects for me. I suppose I should say 18, but I started working on one of the apps when I was 17. But they were both released when I was 18 years old, and they're absolutely nothing special, but they're at least something, and that's honestly something that I'm glad I did. I don't want to live with any regrets. Um, that's one thing that I'm definitely trying to avoid as much as I possibly can. I try and do whatever I think is going to be worth me doing, no matter what it takes to do. I'm going to do it, um, and that's a really interesting thing to think about. Because it's like, well, what's interesting to you? Well, it it depends on the person. You know, everybody has a bunch of different interests. I'm not all that much of a creative person. I'd say I'm about at most 35% creative. I'm pretty lopsided on the intellectual side. And the people that I met at school, which were my teachers, they were of course on the more intellectual side. And that's what really attracted me towards them. And it's like, you know, they've been through a lot more in their life than I have, and I know that, and I know that I could learn a lot of things from them, and that's what I did. I asked them questions. I asked them things that a lot of students probably wouldn't ask. And honestly, some of the questions that I asked have not been beneficial, or the answers that I've gotten haven't been beneficial at all to me. But still, asking questions, that's a big thing. And that's something I actually only learned after I was out of high school. I learned that asking questions is a huge part of life. That if you can become a good asker and a good negotiator, apparently, of course, I'm only starting my life, but apparently you can make it very far just by asking questions, just by being a good negotiator. But you got to know when to use those skills, because sometimes there are wrong questions at the wrong time. Sometimes there are bad negotiations They're bad negotiators, bad people to negotiate with, and it's just unproductive altogether. So the people that I met in high school, like I said, were my teachers, and I learned some of the greatest lessons from one of them in particular. Which before I go too far into this, I'm just going to explain a little bit about this teacher. They were well, I should say he was a big influence. The way that he taught and his knowledge in the subject that he taught is what really struck me as profound whenever I first was introduced to him in grade 9. So 5 years ago, let's say that. Let's run it even. Let's say 5 years ago was whenever I met this teacher. So my teacher's name was Kevin. He's a religion teacher. And I know a lot of people, whenever you hear religion, it's like, oh, well, that's no big deal, you know. And if you're in the U.S., you probably don't even need to take a religion class if you're not, or well, unless if you're at a Catholic school or whatever. If you're at a religious school, I should say, then you probably, of course, don't need to take a religion class. But this was a religion class. But there was something particular about this teacher that it wasn't like he was just talking about religion. He was talking about the implications of religion to real life. And he knew what he was talking about as well. And I could tell that he knew what he was talking about. Now, that's what really struck me as profound. I was like, see, I said like again. That's what I'm trying to stop. But anyways, that's what really struck me is that he wasn't just talking about religion. Like, you could see the implications that you could put from the religious perspective, let's say, so the Bible, or the teachings of the religion into your actual life. And then I delved deeper into that, and that's whenever I got interested in psychology. And that's whenever I started listening to Jordan Peterson, which was a huge influence to me, listening to what Jordan Peterson had to say about a variety of different topics. You know, Jordan Peterson, if you don't know, he's a clinical psychologist. He's been a clinical psychologist for about 20 years. That might be even higher by now, but whenever I first heard it, it could have been maybe 5 years ago whenever I saw that clip of him talking about when he was a clinical psychologist. But now, could be like 25 years that he's been a clinical psychologist, and he has a lot of insight on life. And that's why whenever I really realized my teacher Kevin, I saw a lot of similarities between the two. And so I thought to myself, I was thinking, well, what if I just provoke him a little bit? If I just test Kevin, and I wanted to see, and not test him, just to ask him questions. That's a better way of putting it. It wasn't a test by any means. It was just asking questions to see if he actually wanted to go on that dimension of psychological facts and life facts, like a lot of different ideas to talk about, because there's a lot of different ideas to talk about in life. There's, as I've said, as I was talking about before, there's a lot of different people with a lot of different. There's another by the way. But there's a lot of different personalities in life, and I learned a lot about that in psychology as well. And I'll probably talk about those because I've researched them quite a bit. So I don't want to say an extensive amount of knowledge in personality, but I have a good enough idea to try and work it out, because that's what this is all about. This is all about me trying to practice my extroverted thinking and trying to manifest it and make it as articulated as possible to help people, to help myself. Who knows? I don't know what this is going to do, but I always knew that I wanted to at least practice it, to start, to do something rather than nothing. So as I was saying before, yeah, a lot of people have various different interests that they have. So mine is programming. Mine is also the piano, as you can see. I've been practicing the piano for about a year and a half now. I started back in November 2021, I believe it was. That's whenever I started. And the only reason why I started was because I wanted to learn an instrument, and I didn't know which one at the beginning, but I knew I wanted to learn an instrument. And the piano just really struck me whenever, like every time you hear a piano song. I'm not sure. Of course, it's probably not the same for everyone. But for me, whenever I heard a song played by the piano, it it struck me differently than like the guitar was probably a close number two. And I did try the guitar for a little bit, but I did not enjoy it nearly as much as the piano. And so that's what I've been doing for the past year and a half or so. Another thing that I've also wanted to do is learn another language. So currently, I can speak English and I can speak French to a relatively high degree. English is something that I've been always interested in and trying to work on because it was always my weakest subject in school. Anytime I had an essay, I just couldn't seem to formulate what I wanted to say on paper. I had great ideas in here, or at least what I thought were great ideas, but I could never write it down and properly articulate what I wanted to say. So hopefully, by doing this, I will also increase my ability to essentially write good essays and be able to write the way that I want to write, or that I want, the level that I want to get to, which isn't easy because there's very high levels of writing. There's entire scientific publications, and that's just a really high degree because I've tried to read scientific publications, and the amount of specific words that they have in their publications is just it's really on another level, and it's not something that you would think of even in your head. It's hard to think of in your head, and that's why if I can at least get my words on an extroverted level to where I can properly articulate myself with my voice and organize my thoughts, maybe I can start getting closer to that level that the scientific publications are at. And by scientific publications, I really mean anything. Like you read anything, especially psychology, you're going to be amazed by how difficult it is to comprehend some of the things. And one of the things I actually learned from Jordan Peterson, so he was of course, a clinical psychologist, and so he knows a lot about the historical figures in psychology. One of them is Carl Jung, and Carl Jung, from what Jordan Peterson has said, has some incredibly profound and interesting ideas and topics that he talks about, or that he doesn't talk about, but is written in his books. And I don't know much about Carl Jung, but that is what I've heard, and I couldn't even imagine the things that you could read from his books. And I actually started reading books recently I want to say about 6 months ago I started reading books, because it was something I tried to do, but I never could, and I didn't understand why. Because I knew I definitely had some sort of attraction to the books, but I just didn't know what was wrong. And the thing that was wrong is that I don't enjoy stories. I don't enjoy reading stories. I enjoy watching them. I absolutely love movies. Science fiction, by the way. Absolutely amazing. But books, I just could never read stories. And I believe the reason, actually I just thought about this just now, and this is part of what I wanted to hopefully do, is part of the reason why I think I didn't like reading stories is because you need to have a good you really need to have a good mental capacity for thinking in pictures. And that's something that I do know is definitely a personality trait. Well, not a personality trait, but it's part of someone's personality, is if they can think in pictures or they can think in words or somewhere in between. Now, I believe I'm somewhere in between, but thinking in pictures is definitely, it's only in unique cases that I can think in pictures, but I can do it. But thinking in words, especially like I am right now, I'm trying to bring my thoughts that I have in my mind and articulate them properly through voice. And hopefully I'm doing a good job at that. And hopefully that I will continue to develop this. This is, of course, the first time that I'm doing this properly. As I've said, I have practiced this a little bit before, just on my own. But hopefully I can get a lot better at this, and I can properly think about what I want to say before I say it, and that I'm able to say it properly. Because especially in high school, I had a really hard time with that. I had so many ideas in my head, and they were good ideas, or at least yet again, what I believed to be good ideas. But I could never properly articulate them. And it was only in my grade 12 year that I was able to actually make a good presentation that I actually was proud of. But now looking back on those presentations, like I think about them, it's like, yeah, they were pretty good, but I think I could do way better than what I did. And so that's what I'm trying to practice, you know. And hopefully I can get to that level where I can just go off on long topics in front of audiences and be able to properly articulate what I want to say. That's the big thing. And I also never mentioned, I'm really sorry about all the screens on the side. This is just what I have to work with. You know, I'm in my own room. I did dress up nicely. I didn't want to show up too badly, you know, and I definitely love this type of clothing. That's another thing about me. I really love this type of clothing. So any opportunity that I have to wear it, I'm definitely gonna wear it. So anyways, what else is there about me? Well, let's talk about my personality a little bit. So I'm introverted. So now I'm gonna go first into the Myers-Briggs personality types, and there's 16 different personality types, and they're based off of categories of either introverted or extroverted, and it's 4 letters, by the way. So my category is I'm an INTJ. So there's introverted or extroverted. So my I is introverted. There's intuition or sensing. So I'm intuition, but there is also sensing. There's thinking or there's feeling. So I'm on the thinking side. So feeling would be the other end of that spectrum. And then there's judging or perceiving. And I'm not quite sure what perceiving fully means, but judging I have a pretty good idea, especially because it's kind of self-explanatory what judging is. So INTJ. So let's talk about each of those and how they affected my life. Well, first I'm going to talk about introverted. So when I say introverted, I want to talk very specific about that because it doesn't mean that I was shy. Because shyness and being introverted or extroverted, those are completely different things. Extroverted people just tend to be less shy than introverted people. But introverted tend to be, of course, more shy. But that doesn't mean that introverts are shy and extroverts are not shy. Introverted means that in any social situation that you may get into at any point, you lose energy. Whereas extroverts gain energy from social interactions. And the best way that I've ever heard this put, and I can't remember who it was that I heard this from, but let's just pretend like everybody starts off the day with 5 coins. That's how introverts work. We start off the day with 5 coins. And every time we have a social interaction, we lose a coin. And at the end of the day, we're out of coins and we're absolutely exhausted. Now, an extrovert starts off with 0 coins. They start off with 0, and every time that they have a social interaction, they gain a coin. So by the end of the day, they're full of energy. So that's why, if you have an extroverted person, you can tell, because in the morning they're probably, well, if they wake up in the morning, depends on when they wake up. But let's just say, to generalize it, whenever they wake up, they're probably not going to have a lot of energy. That's really interesting to me. And that's kind of whenever I got more into the psychology. It was right from that, right whenever I learned the true difference between introversion and extroversion. So the next quality, well, not I can't say quality, but maybe it is a quality because it's part of your personality. So it has to be a quality to a certain degree. So I suppose I can use quality here. So the next quality of mine is N, so intuition. So, and this is according to the Myers-Briggs, and I should have mentioned this before. Myers-Briggs was good enough for the 1930s. But nowadays there's a much better scale, and I know about it. It's called the Big Five, but I'm not going to get into that just yet. I'm going to get into that after, and then I'm probably just going to end that here. Because I'm already 25 minutes in, and I think it's going pretty well, for considering this is my first time doing it. So, my next quality is intuition. So, as you can probably imagine, it means that I have a pretty strong degree of confidence in my thinking. Right? And it's really hard to describe what that means to a more precise degree. But essentially, what I'm trying to get at is that whenever I have a problem that I have to deal with, my intuition usually has the right answer most of the time. Compared to the other end, which is sensing. Sensing, whenever you're a sensing person, you don't have intuition, you have sensing, then you kind of feel it out. And that's also why people are impulsive. So let's just pretend, let's take, I'll actually give that example at the end. I'm going to give you an example of the most impulsive, extroverted person that you can possibly think of. I'll give you the exact personality type that it is, and I'll describe it to you. So, but first let's talk about sensing. So sensing is, it generally applies to impulsive people, and it generally applies to the fact that they go with the flow and they just see what happens, and they're gonna test the water, and then if they don't like it, they're gonna stop, or maybe they won't stop, but they're gonna take what they get, and they're gonna have to analyze it because their intuition is not quite as strong. That doesn't mean they're worse, because in sensing you have other qualities that really benefit you. And that's one of the things about each personality type is if they're done correctly, each personality type is equally powerful. It's just that some tend to thrive better because they're easier to manifest and they're easier to attain success in life, whatever whatever your definition of success is in life, which it varies for everybody. The next quality is thinking. So thinking, as you can probably imagine, is thinking. It's using your brain. It's looking at things rationally and logically. Whereas the other end of the spectrum is feeling. So people who are feeling, or feelers, they tend to show their emotions really freely. And really freely. What do I mean by that? I mean, they're usually more sensitive to emotions, positive and negative, although usually more negative. And they are also in tune with other people's emotions a lot better. That's one of the things that I didn't realize about myself until later on. I'm not, or I wasn't, I want to say I'm far better now than what I was. But I used to not be very in tune with other people's emotions. I didn't know why people would. I'm just going to say this forthright, exactly how it is, or how it was. I didn't exactly understand why people cried, because I was never a crier. Or very, very rarely did I cry. There were definitely times that I got aggravated at people and it caused my emotions to clearly come out, and one of them would definitely be crying, without a doubt, absolute certainty. But I never cried in the emotional sense, and what I mean by that is if there was ever a really tragic event that happened, I would not understand what it means to be sad about that event, especially if it was about someone else's emotions. And that's one of the things that I know about my personality type, and that's what young INTJs, so my personality type, that's what young INTJs really face, and it's not good. They can't empathize. And that's, like I said, one thing that I've been working on myself, and I've gotten a lot better at it. And I'm glad that I've gotten a lot better at it, because it's an important quality of human life, is to be good at empathy. It's a really important skill. I said negotiations. Without a doubt, the number one skill, empathy, is not far behind that. If you can get good at that, you're going to be a really, really, really good person that can function well in society. And that's something that young INTJs don't realize. And I know I'm still young, of course, but what I mean by young INTJs is immature INTJs. Because if you're able to recognize your insufficiencies You're able to get better at them, and you're no longer young, in my opinion. Which, what do I mean by young? I mean, what does that even mean? What I mean by young is just emotional maturity, mental maturity, everything. If because maturity isn't really about age. It's just about your mentality towards it. Your mentality towards yourself. Let's go with that. And your mentality towards others. That's why empathy is so strong. So, thinkers, as myself, as I was young, I was really bad at empathizing with others because I just don't understand. It's like, okay, that happened. Why don't you just keep working? But that's obviously not how most people think, and it is a very toxic mindset, and it can really ruin people mentally if you tell them that, especially. I've never done it, and I would never want to do that to someone. To tell them, why don't you just not worry about what happened here? Why don't you just keep moving forward? That's a terrible idea. That's not how humans work at all. And it's a very low category of humans that think like that. And and I want to say this carefully, but it's close to psychopathy. If you're really that bad at empathizing with others, you could be borderline psychopathy, which is borderline psychopath, and that's not good at all. So that's what you want to avoid. And so the final quality or characteristic of the Myers-Briggs personality types is judging and perceiving. So I'm in the judging category. A lot of people are in the judging category. Most people are in the judging category. Perceiving is still pretty popular. You know, but I'd say I think judging is about 60% to 40% for perceiving. So what does judging mean? Well, you're hard-headed, but you're hard-headed because you're skeptical. Let's go with that. And it's really hard to describe this whenever I talk about perceiving. But it's basically you trust everybody until they give you a reason not to trust you, or for you not to trust them. That's a rough explanation of what perceiving is, and I'm probably wrong about it. But I also feel confident enough to say it, which means I'm probably not entirely wrong about it. But I absolutely could be. But that's essentially what perceiving is. You see someone and you think, okay, let's not have an argument here. Let's just see what happens. That's another quality, more impulsiveness. But it's a more mature to a certain degree. Is let's see what happens. But let's see and figure out if they're real or not. Because some people are not real. That's one thing, that's a really big lesson that I learned. It was Jordan Peterson from One Certain. He said there's a difference between being naive and trusting someone and being cynical and trusting no one. Almost everybody starts out naive and you trust everybody because it's like, well, I'm good, so you must be good as well. But as you grow older, you tend to lean towards more the side of, as you go through life experiences, you lean more towards the side of, well, I can be lied to, so why should I trust anybody? Then they become cynical, and then you trust nobody. That's a terrible way of living. And this is how it was put to me, and I absolutely love this. Trust people because you're courageous. Understand that they can still backstab you, that they can still betray you, but trust them anyways. That's courageous trust. You're not naive, because if you were naive, then you would just trust them and figure, oh, of course, they're not going to do anything bad. And if you're cynical, you're not going to trust them at all. But if you trust them and understand that they could still do something bad, that, in my opinion, that's the best way I've ever heard of trust. And that's how I roll my life out now. I always trust someone, but I understand that they're malevolent because everybody's malevolent. I have the capability of it, you have the capability of it, everybody does. So that's how I deal with trust now. I know anybody's capable of causing harm towards me, and I know that I could still cause harm towards them. Because I'm not perfect by any means. There's a lot of things that I do wrong that I or there's a lot of things that I could do wrong that I may not even realize that I'm doing wrong. There's a lot of things that they're doing wrong that either they know they're doing wrong or that they don't even know they're doing wrong and it's still wrong. That's courageous trust. So now let's get back to the Myers-Briggs personality type. So let's talk about now, and how do I say this? The type that's least likely to be successful if they're not fully developed. The type that's least likely to be successful if they're not fully developed is the ESFP. Why? Well, they're extroverted, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with extroversion. That's we're just going to go with that first quality because extroverted people tend to be slightly more impulsive than introverted people. Now that's not, I don't know the statistics on that, but I'm almost certain that extroverted people tend to be more impulsive, which is a bad outcome for a long-term life. Next, you have sensing. Like I said, the opposite of sensing is intuition. Well, if you're sensing, as I said, you're probably more impulsive. You're probably going to see how things go, and you're just going to trust that everything goes fine. Wrong, because that's naive. You can't trust. And next, well, I shouldn't say that. You can trust, but you should know that things can still go wrong even if you trust. So, next is feelings. Well, not only are you expecting everything to go fine because you're just going with the flow, but if something doesn't go right, then you're probably going to be more perceiving to the negative emotions. And so then you get into bad mental states. That's a really rough one to deal with. That's a really rough one to deal with. Feeling, without a doubt. But and there's really massive positive sides to this personality type. But if you're not developed in this personality type and you don't realize you're not developed in this personality type, it can lead you down in a downward trajectory, and it's fast. It really destroys your life. And I've seen it personally. I'm not going to talk at all about that, but I've seen it personally. And I still see it. And now, the fourth characteristic is the P, so perceiving. Like I said, it's kind of hard for me to talk about this one, so we're going to talk about it in terms of the judging. So it's the opposite of judging. So judging is whenever you're somewhat competitive. Let's go somewhat competitive. You're also looking at others from a skeptic point of view, because you know that they can not be trusted sometimes, and you're also judging others, trying to see what inadequacies do they have. Well, perceiving is the exact opposite of that. So how can I say the exact opposite of that? You trust others easier. You are not judging of others, so you don't really speak out. That's one thing. That's a really good point. I really like how I said that. Perceiving people probably don't talk out as much or point out things that they don't like about others. As I said, the big five personality type, or big five personality traits, they go much more into detail, and they're a very modern version of what I'm talking about now, and I'll go into those afterwards. So, the ESFP, so that's why, is because they're mainly impulsive, they definitely don't think about the future, and they're extroverted, which it can cause some poor choices, because extroversion tends to lead to how do I say this? It's not necessarily poor decision making, but it's more like getting into trouble easier, because extroverted people love social life, right? So they want to go to parties, and if they're impulsive, they're going to go to parties as often as they want to. Do you see how bad of a combination that is? You can waste your entire life going to parties every single day and concerts. Introverted people, well, we don't like social that much, so we can hopefully focus on what our interests are a little bit more. But as I said, there's very big positives to extroverts. Number one, Extroverts are without a doubt more charismatic, because they can get along with people easily. For the most part, like I said, they can still be shy. They're shy extroverts. But generally, extroverts tend to get along with people easier, and they're very charismatic. Most presidents, most prime ministers, they're extroverted. Now, not all of them, of course, but it leans more towards that. In fact, 60% of the population is extroverted, roughly. Well, 40% is on the lower end, so introverted. Um, so now about the entire ESFP as a whole, they're essentially your actors. If they're fully developed, they can be, and that's what they're classified as. They're classified as the entertainer, which is, that's a really, I hate the categories that they give to each of them because it makes you think, oh, this is the category I fit in. I'm an entertainer. No, of course you're not. You can be whatever you want to be. Now, ESFP, not only are they the actors, they're also the artists. They're the creative type. They're the creative type, and that's the really impressive part. Is some of the most developed ESFPs are artistic actors. They're creative. They're innovative. It's really quite a thing to see because they have a mind like no other personality type. But it has to be manifested correctly. And if you don't manifest it correctly, you're on a downward trajectory because of your impulsiveness and all of the bad decisions you can make and the parties that you want to go to and your social life. You care more about that than you care about your future, to the point that you don't even have a future, you only have a present. And then you cry about the past sometimes. So that's the ESFP. So that's the Myers-Briggs as a whole. Now I'm only going to delve a little bit into the Big Five personality type, and I'm going to stop it there. My throat's getting a little dry. I kind of should have brought water. Of course, that's a great idea to bring something to drink to keep me hydrated. Talking for this long. So the Big Five personality types. So we have agreeableness, extroversion. We have narcissism. Narcissism, that's a really big one. And I didn't really fully know what it meant until a couple months ago whenever I really went into the psychology of personalities and psychology of life and all that. So you have agreeableness, you have extroversion, you have openness, you have narcissism. So, and then the last one, what's that last one? I should really know this. This is something that I've studied a lot and I've looked at and I've wondered. Conscientiousness, fifth one. Fifth one is conscientiousness. So you have agreeableness, extroversion, openness, narcissism, and conscientiousness. Let's talk about agreeableness. Now, I'm not going to give any specific example of this, but I have seen someone in my life that is a very agreeable person. And and whenever I start talking to them about, agreeableness as an entire personality trait, they really thought about it. They're like, wow, that explains my entire life. It's like, where was this? Where was this throughout all of high school or anything? Where was this ever taught? We're not taught about our personalities because you barely know yourself. I barely know myself. That's what I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to figure out what I like, what I dislike, trying to figure out how I can manifest myself in the world. That's why I'm doing this. I'm trying to bring myself to be a better person. I'm trying to figure out and organize my thoughts in an articulated manner that will be beneficial for myself and hopefully for others around the world. And agreeableness, whenever I told this person that they were their agreeable person, and then I told them what that meant exactly, and that's what I'm going to get into. Well, what's agreeableness? I just blew their mind. They're like, this explains my entire life. Well, I'm going to talk also about my personality type, so INTJ. So, agreeableness. Well, if you're highly agreeable, you don't want fights. You don't want arguments, and that often leads to you being manipulated and used. And it's a really bad thing, but it's also a really good thing if it's used properly, and that's where you need that courageous trust. You need to know when you're being used, and when you can actually be a negotiator, because that's essentially what agreeableness is. If you're agreeable, and you have courageous trust as well, and you're knowing that you can be deceived, you can be a good negotiator. And disagreeable people are the exact same, except disagreeable people, it comes a lot easier because they have a really good sense for whenever they're being deceived. And that's exactly what my personality type is. It is usually disagreeable for the most part. Assertive disagreeableness as well. So we're competitive, hyper competitive for the most part. We really want to put our voices out there, and we want to be heard, and we want to show what we're capable of. And oftentimes we're capable of great things, and sometimes we're capable of not as much as what we thought we were capable of. So agreeableness is essentially what it is. Next, we're going to go into openness. Now, openness is the highest predictability of intellect. And so if you're high in openness, you're probably high in intellect, but that's obviously not guaranteed. But that's a pretty big indicator. That and conscientiousness. I believe conscientiousness has a pretty big role. Openness and conscientiousness, those two play hand in hand with intellect. And intellect is not the same as IQ. If I'm not mistaken, intellect is a different category from IQ. IQ is a really bad measurement if you're not doing it exactly how it's supposed to be done. And even then it doesn't work very well. But it's also not it's not terrible. IQ is not a terrible measurement. So if you're high in openness, of course you're high in open to experiences. You want to try out things. You want to discover. You want to ask questions. That's a big one. Of course, if you're an intellect type, you probably ask questions. You want to know things. You want to understand how things work. And you're also able to adapt to change, and you want to change, and you want to see what change looks like. If you're low in openness, of course you don't want change, which can be beneficial, and I've never really thought about that, openness. If you're low in openness, how exactly does that manifest itself? And for my personality type, the INTJ, usually high in openness. Usually. 50% and above, usually. But if you're low in openness, then you don't want change, and you want to stick to a routine. That's the thing. That's a really important thing, is that you want to stick to a routine. So if you're low in openness, chances are you can get into discipline easier. You can usually get into discipline easier if you're low in openness. The next category is conscientiousness. Now, conscientiousness is essentially your ability to perceive yourself and others around you in a heightened degree of, how would I say this? Conscientiousness is being able to interpret your ideas properly to yourself and others in the correct way. Now, but it's usually more in yourself than in others. And I've never tried to really articulate this vocally of what conscientiousness is. So this is a really difficult one for me to try and think through. But if you're low in conscientiousness, you tend to be on the lower end of IQ. Not all the time, because if you're high in openness and low in conscientiousness, which I believe rarely happens, but if it does happen, that's just a really interesting conundrum you have there. But it certainly must happen. I'm just not exactly sure which cases that happens and what that exactly means, which is why I try to delve into the psychology of it all more and more every day to learn more and more about it. I always listen to lectures every single day about it. And the fourth one we're going to is extroversion and introversion, which I pretty much already talked about. And they don't actually have introversion as a scale measurement on the big five traits. They only have extroversion. But if you're lower in extroversion, on like the very low end, then you're basically introverted, but they don't call it introversion. They just call it low in extroversion. So of course, INTJ, low in extroversion. And conscientiousness, by the way, we're usually pretty high on conscientiousness. And I don't think a lot of people, well, that's hard to say. I wanted to say that I don't think a lot of people are high in conscientiousness, but I don't think a lot of people are low in conscientiousness either. Because that's why IQ, the average for IQ is about 100. So if you have an IQ of 100, you're in the average range. So of course, you'd think, well, if there's people that are high in conscientiousness, low in conscientiousness, it's like the same as the IQ. Someone that's 130 in IQ and someone that's 70 in IQ, which, by the way, 70 in IQ is really low, and only about 15% of the population, if I'm not mistaken, are in that category. We don't actually have jobs for people in that category of IQ. We just don't know what to do with them, because even the most menial of jobs, they're not able to comprehend them. We don't know what to do with them, and that's a bad problem. That's something that I heard from Jordan Peterson. He talked about that a lot. And he's either hoping that the Prime Minister at some point will address that issue, or President of the United States will address that issue, because about 15% of the population can't get a job because they're simply not smart enough for it. That's, to put it bluntly, that's exactly what it is. But they could be high in creativity. That's the big thing. It's like you can be really, really, really low in IQ, but you can be highly creative, which is so interesting. That's why each personality type is just, it's mind-boggling how many combinations there are for every single person. Why everybody's so different, of course. Why you get along with some people and why you don't with others. Of course, if you're agreeable, you probably don't get along with disagreeable people. If you're disagreeable, you probably manipulate the agreeable people. Isn't that interesting how that works? So, if you're, I don't even remember where I was going with it, so I'm just going to move on. Fifth one is going to be narcissism. Now, narcissism, like I said, I only recently learned about it a couple months ago, but I have a really good idea of what it is. Narcissism, if you're high in narcissism, you're really, really responsive to negative emotion. I don't believe it's emotion. I believe any emotion. I believe it's only negative. So if you're really high in narcissism, you could have bipolar disorder. That's a really interesting thing to think about. Because bipolar disorder, it's like waves of really highs and really lows. It's really high highs, waves of really high positive emotion, and you go really low for a couple weeks. So if you're higher in narcissism, perhaps there's some sort of link there. I absolutely have no idea. I'm just kind of talking about this in my head. That's what extroverted thinking is. It's just thinking through the problem and trying to figure out what you can make with the information that you have, which, I could be completely wrong on some of the things that I'm talking about. Some of the things I know what I'm saying is right because I've read about it and I've heard about it and I have factual evidence that supports it. But if you're low in narcissism, then you're not highly responsive to negative emotion, which INTJs, of course, as I said, we're pretty bad at empathy if we're young and naive and immature. So we're usually very low on the narcissism scale. And that's definitely something I've seen in my life too, for the most part. I very rarely got angry. I very rarely cried. And I've heard, and I've had friends like this, they say they cry like every second day or every single night. I could never imagine myself in a million years doing that. I cry. Last time I cried, let's talk about this. This is a personal thing, but why not? Last time I cried, it was at least 3 months ago. And the particularities, why did I cry? I think, why did I cry? I've had a lot of times where I've cried because I heard a really good story or I heard a really powerful message and I get close to crying, but often I don't actually get to the full point of crying. But I get really teary-eyed because I hear something that's just so really heart-striking. That's absolutely not the right word, but we're going to go with it. It really just hits you. And I've had that. But 3 months ago, probably the last time I cried, and it was a negative cry. Now, it wasn't a positive emotion cry, because positive emotion would have been if I heard a good story. It was a negative cry. I think it was because I was pretty unguided in where I want to go, and I'm still pretty unguided in where I want to go. But since then, I've realized that everybody's unguided and they don't know where they want to go. So that's how I'm basically at the advantage, or at least that's how I see it. I'm at a pretty distinct advantage Because now I know that the thing that I was worrying about, well, I don't know where I want to go. I don't know what I want to do. Like I have so many choices. I love the piano. I love learning new languages. I'm currently learning Japanese. That's one thing I never mentioned. I said I wanted to learn another language, but I never said which one. We went on a tangent of talking about how I know French, but Japanese is the language I'm currently learning. It's been over 2 years now that I've been learning it. Casually, about like 10 minutes a day, nothing big. But I can see it developing slowly, and it's very satisfying to see that. But I'm pretty sure that's why I cried the last time. That's because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't know where I wanted to go. Because there's a lot of choices in life, and that's one of the things. But then I learned you narrow down your perspective and try to choose the path with the least possible obstructions. Because every path is going to have catastrophes. Every path is going to have bad problems. Every path is going to have good successes. You just got to choose something. That's what you got to do. So what did I choose? What did I choose? I chose to get a job. I chose to get up on my feet and do something. Because I still don't know fully what I want, but I have a job. That's something. I'm working on myself every day. I'm listening. I'm trying to learn as much information as I can from as many people as I possibly can. I try to ask questions from people that I know are going to have good answers. And maybe that's a little bit self-centered or something like that. Like of course, I know you're going to have good answers. Like I don't really know who has a good answer because I think it's probably everybody that has good answers, everybody that has bad answers. But I try to ask questions, especially to the people that I think have good answers. And Kevin, my teacher in high school, is one of them. And I always love talking to him because he always has such great insights. And I'm going to continue to keep talking to him as much as I can. I think he's in his late 40s. I'm not absolutely certain about that, but I believe that's where he is, late 40s. But it's always a pleasure talking to him. We talk a lot about philosophy, a lot about psychology. We talk about religion and about the implications of that. And then I recently started listening to Jordan Peterson about the biblical analysis, the psychological, or maybe it was the physiological analysis of the biblical series of Genesis. That's what I've been listening to recently. I believe that's exactly how it was named. And it's so incredibly interesting because it's really valuable life lessons that I will never forget, and that are you can't, no matter how many years of life that you have, you still won't have these answers. So the fact that he's just giving them out, you got to find them, you got to listen, you got to know what you're listening to. But if you're really interested, and you really know what you're looking for, then you're going to hear those answers and you're going to apply them to your life, and you're going to realize just how much that does. It is absolutely profound how much it can change your life. I don't even want to say that that's what changed my life. My life changed about, I want to say, how would I say that is? I think my life changed about a year and a half ago. No, maybe only a year ago. I think only a year ago my life changed completely. I started doing things and developing myself in a whole new way that I never thought I would. And now I look back on high school and things that I didn't do, the things that I did do, and of course now I know that in life, as people get older, they tend to regret the things that they could have done that they didn't do, or the things that they did do that they made mistakes on. Because a mistake is just a mistake. But if you regret something, you never even had the chance of doing something. If you regret not doing something. But if you make a mistake, but you still did it, at least you did it, it's a lot less painful. So that's what I try and strive to do, is to have as little regrets as possible in my life, and that's started about a year ago. And I wish I learned this sooner. And I know no one's probably ever going to watch this. I don't mind. This is for me. This is to listen to myself. This is a practice for myself. I learned that talking to myself and listening to myself talk is how I improve my extroverted thinking. And that's the point of this, to improve my extroverted thinking. So thank you, if you are listening, thank you for listening to